Thank you. I'm talking about the extended mind, the mind beyond the brain. And I'm going to start with a few reflections on the nature of consciousness. We don't know how consciousness works or what it does. This is one of the things which in science is sometimes called the hard problem, because there's no known obvious reason why we should be conscious at all, or exactly how the mind works. And consciousness studies is one of the most exciting frontier areas of science today. What I'm going to suggest is that our minds are field-like, that they're not confined to the inside of the head. They spread out into the environment around us. And because our minds are extended beyond our brains, they can have effects at a distance, which are surprising from the conventional point of view, and help to make sense of a range of controversial phenomena like telepathy. So the first point is that the question of where is the mind located. I'm suggesting that minds are field-like and spread out beyond brains in a similar way to the way that magnetic fields spread out beyond magnets, cell phone fields spread out beyond cell phones, and the Earth's gravitational field stretches out far beyond the Earth. These fields are within and around the material systems they organize. And I think the same is true of our brains. The place where this becomes easiest to understand is in terms of vision and the question of how vision works. Most people think they know how vision works, and science has told us a great deal about it. And what we know is that when you see me standing here now, for example, light is reflected from me, goes through the electromagnetic field, inverted images appear on your retinas, changes happen in the cone cells, and then impulses travel up the optic nerves and various bits of your brain become active. That's what happens during the physical side of perception. There are two problems here. First of all, there's no explanation in this as to why you should be conscious at all. That's simply not explained by describing what happens in the nervous system. And the second problem is that, according to the standard view, all this is supposed to be happening inside your brain. If the mind is nothing but the brain, which is the usual assumption within the academic and medical worlds, mental activity is nothing but brain activity, everything you're seeing is inside your head. Somehow, miraculously, in an unexplained way, changes in your nervous cells lead to a kind of virtual reality display inside your head by which you see what's going on in the world. So right now, for example, somewhere inside your head, there's a little virtual Rupert somewhere in your brain, and you think it's out here as I'm standing here talking. If you look at the sky you're seeing is an image of the sky inside your head, so your skull must be beyond the sky. A recent paper in a leading consciousness journal was called, "Is Your Skull Beyond the Sky?" Because if the sky you see is inside your head, the skull must be beyond the sky. The answer of the author was yes. My answer would be no. In fact, I suggest the very common sense view, a view that's so simple it's hard to grasp, that when you're seeing something, the image you're seeing is where it seems to be. Your image of me is located not inside your head, but right here. It's in your mind, produced by your mind, but it's not in your brain. It's projected out. And I'm suggesting our whole visual experience of the world is projected out to where it seems to be. Our minds are projecting out all that we see. So vision's a two-way process, light coming in and the outward projection of images. This, I suggest, happens through what I call a perceptual field, which is a kind of morphic field, another category of field that is part of a theory I've developed, which I don't have time to explain today. But it's a field phenomenon, and in a sense, your mind reaches out to touch what you're looking at. The image of what you're seeing is superimposed on what's really there. Sometimes it's not, as in a mirror reflection when you have a virtual image, or an illusion or a hallucination, but usually it is. So what I'm suggesting is that you can, by looking at things, your mind touches them. There's a sense in which you might be able to affect things just by looking at them. Is this true? Can you affect anything by looking at it? Think of another person. Can you affect another person by looking at them? Of course, if they see you looking at them, we all know you can. But what if you're looking at them from behind, through a car window, for example, no sun, no smell, they can't see you're there, they don't know you're there. Can you affect them just by looking at them? Well, most people think that that does happen. 90% of the population have had the experience of feeling that sometimes when they're being looked at from behind, they turn around, someone's looking at them. Surveys show that more women than men have had that experience. It's still a very large majority. More men than women have had the experience of looking at others and making them turn around. But most men and women have had both these experiences, and I guess most people in this room have experienced these things personally. So the sense of being stared at is a well-known phenomenon. It's found all over the world. Children know about it, adults know about it, but it's not part of the standard scientific map. You won't find any reference to it in psychology textbooks. There's virtually no research literature on this until about 15 years ago. And it's extraordinarily under-researched in spite of the fact it's very well known. The standard scientific education that most of us receive makes us think, well, this must be some kind of illusion. So probably most people in this room have been trained to dismiss the phenomenon by saying, oh, it's just a coincidence. You turn around all the time. If no one's looking at you, you forget about it. If they are, you think there's some mysterious sense involved, but it's really nothing but either coincidence or peripheral vision or something like that. That's the standard way of explaining it away. But now many experiments have been done to test whether this is real. And the simplest experiment involves people working in pairs. One sits with a blindfold with their back to another. The other person either looks or doesn't look at them in a randomized sequence, and in each trial the person has to guess if they're being looked at or not. Hundreds of thousands of these trials have been done. The overall results show a positive, a very significant effect. When things are repeated over hundreds of thousands of trials with many independent replications, they become very significant, even though, as in this case, the effect is fairly small. These experiments have also been done in Amsterdam in the Science Museum, in one of the largest experiments ever conducted for more than 20 years. This experiment's been running. More than 20,000 participants have taken part. The results are, again, overwhelmingly positive and significant. Rather surprisingly, this phenomenon also occurs through closed-circuit television. Various experiments have been done whereby people's skin conductance is measured with electrodes on their fingers. This measures emotional arousal. And it turns out that there's a significant change in people's emotional arousal when they're being looked at through closed-circuit television by someone on a monitor in a different room. This work's been replicated as well. One of the people who's done it, Marilyn Schlitz, is right here in the Bay Area. Indeed, she's right here in this room. So there's now a substantial body of work showing that people can tell when they're being looked at, even through closed-circuit television. This is something which has become of great interest to the security agencies, and I can't divulge exactly who or why, but I can tell you that the security forces are very interested in this question. Could a potential terrorist, for example, tell when they're being watched through closed-circuit television? The answer to that is probably yes, if they've trained their sensitivity a bit. This phenomenon is well known to security guards. Most security guards are well aware that if people are looked at from behind, they can tell when they're being looked at. Private detectives know that when they're shadowing people, when they're following them, they shouldn't stare at their back because the person's likely to turn around and catch their eye and blow their cover. People in the martial arts know about this, and there are martial arts methods for training your sensitivity to feeling people's intentions or looks from behind. And in the closed-circuit television industry, which now involves millions of CCTV cameras engaged in surveillance work, many operatives know that you can affect people by looking at them. I gave a talk about this in Washington, D.C. last year, and one of the guys in the audience told me afterwards that he was, in fact, a security guard. And when he was trained by an FBI trainer, they told him, if you see someone doing something they shouldn't do, just stare at them hard on the screen, and they'll probably stop it. And I said to him, does that work? And he said, sure, I do see it almost every day. He said, we all know this stuff. he was amazed that this is a controversial issue within the academic scientific world, because people in the security industry take this for granted. In the British Special Services, the SAS, when people are being trained how to stab others in the back, they're trained that you don't stare at the person's back before you stab them, because they're likely to feel it, turn around and shoot you. So these things are completely taken for granted, yet they're a huge scientific anomaly. It shouldn't happen if the mind's all in the brain. But if our visual activity involves the outward projection of images, and even a kind of resonant projection when you see something on a computer screen, it's not a direct effect. In that case, just seeing the image can affect the person. Something else is going on. I think our minds are in fact extended beyond our brains in every act of attention and perception. And this is not a new view. It's a view put forward by Plato and other Greek philosophers. And it's the view taken for granted by Western children under the age of 10 or 11. Studies on children's intellectual development shows that most children assume that vision involves this outward projection. That's why Superman comics and things show rays coming out of the eyes of superheroes. It's a very popular childlike way of seeing or understanding. Piaget, the developmental psychologist who studied children's intellectual development, said that by the age of about 10 or 11, the average child learns the correct view, which is that thoughts and images are invisible things located inside the head. We've all been brought up with the correct view, in spite of the fact there's virtually no evidence for it. No one's ever seen a thought or an image inside a head. And our own experience of seeing things outside us directly contradicts this theory. So we've bought into a theory that's totally at variance with our most immediate experience. And I'm suggesting our minds reach out beyond our brains, and the sense of being stared at is one aspect of this. Animals feel it too. Many animals can tell when they're being looked at. There's a lot of evidence for this from wildlife photographers and hunters. And many people say that they can feel when animals are looking at them. Jim Corbett, who was a famous tiger shooter during the British Raj in India, author of books like Man-Eaters of Kumaon, said that his life had been saved on many occasions by feeling the look of a hidden tiger. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he felt this tiger's presence and escaped. I think that this isn't just something that happens between people and animals and people and people. I think it happens between animals and other animals. Anyway, as I say, this is an area where there's research going on actively at present. And it's one of the ways in which our minds seem to be extended beyond our brains and have effects which ought not to occur within the standard view of things, but which do seem to occur and which most people have actually experienced themselves. And this is one of the phenomena that I call a mystery of everyday life. It's something almost everybody, even every child, knows about. But most scientists have been trained not to think about it or to dismiss it because it doesn't fit the paradigm or the model. If we move to this extended mind model, it makes good sense. There's another way in which the extended mind idea makes better sense of our experience than the idea that it's all in the brain. And that's to do with the way that social animals are coordinated with each other. All social animals have to work together, by definition, in a harmonious way for the society to hold together. And this is shown most graphically in the case of flocks of birds. Here you see a flock of starlings. The flock can fly together. They can turn immensely quickly without bumping into each other. Here are some other pictures of flocks of birds, of starlings, and the astonishing maneuvers that they make. Some of you will be familiar with animation, computer animations of bird flocks like Craig Reynolds' classic Boyd's model from the 80s. Which seem to show you can just explain it by nearest neighbor sensations. Actually, you can't. Those models are biologically naive. They assume that birds look at their nearest neighbor, process the information, adjust their flight, and change direction. That takes a lot of time. Nervous systems work slowly compared with computers. And the birds are reacting too fast for that to happen. The best computer models are field models that treat the whole flock as a field phenomenon. And I think they are indeed field phenomena, that members of social groups are linked through social fields or morphic fields of the social group. The same applies, of course, to schools of fish, like this one. And especially when predators attack, they can scatter in different directions very rapidly without bumping into each other. The whole group seems to move as a unit, as a kind of field. And the individuals move in response to the field, which is both produced by the individuals and acts back upon them. It's more than the sum of the parts acting. It's a kind of emergent field phenomenon. I think all social animals have such fields joining them together, even when they move apart. A pack of wolves, for example, has a morphic field of the group. When some of them go away, like adult wolves go hunting to fetch food for the young that are left in the den, the field isn't broken, it stretches. And I think they remain connected at a distance through this stretched field. A change in one can affect the other through this field that connects them. That, I think, is the basis of telepathy. I think it's a normal means of communication among separated members of animal groups, or even non-separated members. I don't think it's paranormal, I think it's normal, I don't think it's supernatural, I think it's natural, and I think it's essentially a form of animal communication within groups. Another way of thinking about this is through quantum entanglement, and Dean Radin, who gave a talk here at Google some time ago, a few months ago, has written a book called Entangled Minds, suggesting that when people have close social relationships and interactions, their minds become entangled, so that when they separate, there's still an entanglement between them, so a change in one is reflected by a change in another. Quantum non-locality, entanglement of quantum particles, is well known, well documented, and it's in fact the basis of now technological applications in quantum cryptography and quantum computing. And what that shows is that particles that are part of the same system, when they move apart, a change in one is immediately associated with a change in the other. This is independent of distance, unlike many other physical phenomena. It doesn't matter if it's an inch apart or a mile apart. It's distance-independent entanglement or non-local connection. I'm suggesting something like that happens in the case of animal groups and in social groups in general, including human groups. And because I think it's basically an animal phenomenon that we share in because we're animals, rather than some kind of spiritual phenomenon that only humans have, my first studies on telepathy were with animals. And I started with the animals we know best, like cats and dogs and other animals that people live with and get to know very well, and which form bonds with their human companions. The first stage in this research was natural history. Every science begins with natural history, and no one had ever done this. So I collected lots and lots of stories about people, about their pets. What did they see in their pets' behavior that suggested something might be going on beyond normal sensory information? I soon collected thousands of these stories that I classified in a whole series of different categories on a computer database. The fact that people report these phenomena doesn't prove they're right about their reports. But for me, the plural of anecdote is data. And when you have hundreds of reports of the same kind of phenomenon from all over the world, at least it shows lots of people are observing or think they're observing the same kind of thing. And that then has to be investigated further. For example, on our database, we have hundreds of reports from cat owners saying their cat seems to read their mind and know when they're planning to take it to the vet. The cat disappears. After it's happened a few times, people try to avoid giving the cat any clues. They don't let it see the carrying basket. They try not to think of the word vet. Some people even ring the vet from work so the cat doesn't overhear the conversation. And then they swing by home on the way back from work to pick it up, and it's still not there. So many of these stories that we did a survey of all the veterinary clinics in the North London Yellow Pages, 65 of them, rang them up and said, do you ever have a problem with people missing appointments with cats? 64 out of 65 said, yes, it happens all the time. And the remaining ones said, it happens so often we've given up the appointment system for cats. People just have to turn up with them. With dogs and cats, another very common phenomenon is the animals knowing when their owners are coming home. A lot of dogs and cats wait at a door or window when the owner's on the way home. Even if they come at non-routine times, even if they come by public transport, even if they're in a friend's car, and even if the people at home don't know when they're coming. many of these stories, about 800 of these stories with dogs on our database, about 500 with cats. Also stories about lambs that are raised by hand on milk that do it, a few rabbits and guinea pigs and ferrets that do it, parrots, parakeets, budgerigars that do it. A range of animals do this, but all of them are mammals and birds. I haven't come across any cases of return anticipating reptiles. I've tried hard to find such cases, and including launching appeals for information in journals like Reptilian International. And I haven't come across any convincing cases of snakes, monitor lizards, or fish like goldfish, or insects like stick insects seeming to feel this. It only seems to happen with mammals and birds that form close bonds with their owners. Well, is this just an illusion? When I discussed it with one of my skeptical colleagues in Cambridge, Nicholas Humphrey, who's a psychologist, to my surprise, he didn't deny the phenomenon. In fact, he said, well, my dog used to do that. My mother always knew when I was coming home, the dog would go to the door. And I said, but surely the dog couldn't have heard your car from the other side of Cambridge from many miles away against all the traffic that's there, irrespective of the wind direction. And he said, oh, on the contrary, it just shows what sharp hearing they've got. And because he and I differ in many respects in our opinions, yet we share a belief in science and scientific method, this led to the idea for an experiment. And the experiment is the person goes at least 5 miles from home. The place where the dog waits is filmed continuously on time-coded videotape. The person comes home at a randomly chosen time communicated by a pager. They don't know that in advance. The people at home, if any, don't know when they're coming. And to avoid familiar car sounds, they travel by unfamiliar vehicles, like taxis. Well, I've now done hundreds of those kinds of experiments with dogs, and the results are pretty clear-cut. The dogs go and start waiting over and over again when the person's coming home. In fact, with the most sensitive dogs, when they form the intention to come home before they've even got into the taxi. This research has been written up. It's published in journals. You can see the full reports on my website. And it's now being replicated by an online open source science project where people are putting up pictures of their dogs waiting at the door on YouTube. So you can actually see ongoing experiments of this kind. This slide shows a survey of dogs and cats that do this, a random household survey done in 2 locations in Britain and 2 in California. You'll see that about 50% of dogs are reported by their owners to anticipate the arrival of a member of the family. An average of about 30% of cats. For some reason, the Californian cats do it more than British cats. We haven't worked out why. But even in Los Angeles, where the most impressive animals seem to live, cats do it less than dogs. And that doesn't necessarily prove cats are less sensitive than dogs. It may just prove that some of them are less interested. In these experiments with dogs that know when their owners are coming home, we've done lots of these experiments. You can read the details online if you want to. But basically, what these graphs show is the number of seconds the dog stays at the window. And these are 10-minute intervals after the person leaves home. You see, the dog does sometimes go to the window when they're not coming home, like here and here. And when you see the videos, in most of these cases, they're going to look at things going on outside, to bark at passing cats and so on. They're obviously not waiting, but we've included all the data, so there's no bias introduced by any subjective judgment. What you see is the 10 minutes of the first 10 minutes of the homeward journey, there, and there. The dogs are at the window most, and they're there also before the person actually gets in the car and the car starts moving. That's because people form the intention to go home before the car actually moves. You have to think about it before you get in the car. But the highest amount of time at the window is when they're on the way home. These data were, of course, challenged by skeptics. As you know, anything to do with telepathy is immensely controversial. There are vigilante organizations that have been set up to try and discredit research of this kind. There are active groups of highly motivated skeptics. They vastly outnumber researchers in this field. The total number of subscribers to skeptical magazines in the US is about 100,000. The total number of full-time researchers in parapsychology is about 5. So they're outnumbered about 20,000 to 1 by well-organized groups of skeptics. And so, of course, and rightly so, this work was criticized by skeptics. One of them, Richard Wiseman, a British media skeptic and psychologist, said that I must have made mistakes in the result, faulty randomization, the wrong kind of vehicle to bring people home. So I invited him to do his own experiments with with one of the same dogs, the same dog I worked with here. And these are the results of the 3 experiments he did in the same location. As you see, it's an almost perfect replication. The most time the dog was at the window was in the first 10 minutes of the homeward journey. And showed exactly the same kind of pattern. At first, he argued these refuted my results because the dog went to the window before the owner set off, and the rest of the data could therefore be discarded. But in fact, most people don't think that's a valid approach. I certainly don't. He himself now admits that this is, in fact, a replication of the effect. He doesn't agree with my interpretation, but his own results clearly replicated the same pattern as my own. Not only animals, but people commonly show telepathic behavior or sensitivities. These things are widely believed in our society. The great majority of people in America, Britain, Germany, South America, India, in fact, all over the world, think they've had telepathic experiences. Skeptics dismiss this by saying, well, these are just uneducated people prone to illusion, and it's all just a delusion in their minds, a false interpretation of what's happened to them, an inadequate understanding of chance and statistics, and so forth. You're all familiar with those arguments. But starting as a biologist, I wanted to look at the things where this happens most commonly and most biologically. One case in the human realm is with mothers and babies. Many mothers claim that they can feel when their baby needs them. A lot of nursing mothers have what's called the milk letdown reflex. That, for the benefit of the men here, which is the majority, is a reflex that occurs with nursing mothers. Normally, when they hear the baby cry, there's a release of oxytocin from the brain that causes the breast to prepare to feed the baby. There's special changes occur in the breast. The nipples start leaking. Many women experience a tingling sensation. Some women experience that when they're away from their baby. They may be shopping in a supermarket, and suddenly their milk lets down. They feel their breast tingle. Most women, when that happens, assume that the baby needs them. They used to just go home. Nowadays, they call home on a cell phone. They're often right. Not always, but very often. And I've done detailed studies on breastfeeding mothers in London that show that the odds against this happening by chance at the time the baby really does need them, the odds are about 1 billion to 1 against chance in the study I did. So I think there's something really going on there, and this is a very good area to study telepathy. It's central aspects of life, and until the invention of modern telecommunications, the only way that a mother could know her baby needed her immediately when she was far away from it was through telepathy. It's the only way people or animals could communicate at a distance until the invention of telegraphs and telephones. Well, telephones are, in fact, one of the ways in which telepathy emerges most strongly in the modern world. Surveys show that the great majority of people have had experiences of what I call telephone telepathy. You think of somebody for no apparent reason, and then that person calls, and you say, that's funny, I was just thinking about you. Surveys in a variety of countries have shown that more women than men claim this experience, about 95 or 96% of women, about 72% of men. There are some national differences in men. The most sensitive men in our survey were in Argentina, the least sensitive in Britain. With other kinds of telepathy, the figures are still way above the 50% mark. They're the majority of people, but much less common than telephone telepathy. So what's going on here? It's very common. I imagine most people in this room have experienced it. Is this just an illusion? What do the skeptics say? Well, what the skeptics say, and what most people in this room have probably been trained to say, and probably heard said very often, is, oh, well, it's just a coincidence. You think of people all the time, one of them rings, and then you think, oh, well, it must have been telepathy, but you forget the millions of times you were wrong. A reasonable hypothesis, chance, coincidence, and selective memory, but where's the data? In science, it's not enough to put forward an armchair hypothesis. You need data. Skeptics have been advancing that argument for 100 years since the invention of the telephone, and there was not one shred of data to support it. And nothing in science deserves a free ride. And you need evidence. Anyway, I've developed a test to try and find out what's really going on. Is it just coincidence or not? For that, you need statistical experiments. And how I've been doing these tests is as follows. Imagine you're somebody who has this experience and you volunteer to be a subject in one of these experiments. You give me the names of 4 people you might be telepathic with, typically people you're closely related to, family members, girlfriends, boyfriends, close colleagues, people you know well. You give me their numbers and their names. You sit at home, you're videotaped continuously while you sit by a landline telephone with no caller ID system. We then pick one of your 4 callers at random using a randomizing device, call them up and ask them to phone you. They phone you. The phone rings. Before you pick it up, you guess who it is. I think it's John. You pick it up. Hi, John. You're right or you're wrong. It's an objective fact. It's on film. And your chance by getting it right by just guessing is 25%, 1 in 4. Well, in these experiments, the chance rate, the 25% chance rate is there, and the actual hit rate, 45%, is what we found. And this was with hundreds of tests, and the probability figure for this is 1 times 10 to the minus 12. In other words, this is way beyond what you'd expect by chance. This is a highly significant, statistically significant result. It's not just chance. Whatever it is, it's not just chance. We then did these tests where 2 of the 4 callers were strangers that people had never met, but whose names they knew. The other 2 were people they knew well. And here we found with the unfamiliar callers, the success rate was pretty well at the chance level, just above. With the familiar callers, it was way above chance, in this case 52%. So these telephone telepathy tests are a new way of testing for telepathy. They've given highly significant positive results. There's no effect of distance in accordance with other research on telepathy. We did some of our experiments with young Australians and New Zealanders who'd recently arrived in London, whose nearest and dearest were at the Antipodes, the other side of the world. Their hit rates were actually higher with people in Australia and New Zealand than with new acquaintances in England, showing that what matters is emotional proximity rather than physical proximity. And this has now been replicated in a number of studies at Cape Town University, at Amsterdam University by Dick Bierman and his colleagues, and recently at Freiburg University in Germany. And it was also done as a replication for a TV show in Britain under controlled conditions with the Nolan sisters, who were an 80s girl band. And that's now available on YouTube. You can actually see, there's a 5-minute clip showing that experiment. You can get to it through my website, www.sheldrake.org. But if you're interested in seeing one of these tests, you can do that easily enough. The latest evolution of telepathy is in connection with emails. The same kind of things now started happening with emails. Lots of people think of someone, then they get an email from them. They say, that's funny, I was just thinking about you. We've done very similar experiments with emails, 4 emailers, random choice of who's going to email you. People have to guess just before they get the email who's sending it. We have fixed times for this experiment. You know that you'll get an email at, say, 4 o'clock. So at 3:59, you have to send me an email with your guess. Then the person sends their email at 4 o'clock, and with a CC to me. From the emails themselves, we know to the exact second when the guess was sent and when the actual email was sent. And so we can show that the guesses are made before the email has been sent. It's built into the technology. We've done those also with people being filmed for security reasons to make sure they're not cheating by means of mobile phones, regular phones, MSN Messenger, or anything like that. And the results of the email experiments show a similar effect. The chance level of 25%, the film tests 47% is the hit rate. And again, we get a higher hit rate with the familiar than the unfamiliar callers. We also found no effect of distance in these email telepathy tests. Well, these tests lend themselves to automation. And I've recently been, in the last couple of years, developing a whole set of automated online tests for telepathy. Some of them are automated email tests. The whole of this can be done online, where you register online, you put in the names of your emailers, the computer selects an emailer at random, asks them to send you an email by sending them an email. So the whole thing's done by email, and all the results are recorded in an online database. I also have a similar experiment working with text message tests on mobile telephones. And those, both the email and the automated text message tests are giving significant positive results. These are being done by anyone who wants to do them. It's completely open science. I don't know that some of those people couldn't have been cheating. Perhaps they were. There's not much incentive, I think, to cheat because most people are trying to find out how telepathic they are, and there's no point doing it if you're cheating. But some of them could have been. The only way to deal with the cheating thing is for anyone to do it themselves. If you do it, you'll know if you're cheating or not. You could do it with a group of friends who you trust and see what the group results come up with. These can be set as classroom experiments in colleges and schools, and some instructors are already doing this. And when you register for the test, you put in a group name, and people could then recover all the results from that group name online, on the online database. So in some universities, instructors have set these as homework assignments. In a study in scientific methodology, it triggers off a very lively debate among students. It gives results generally positive, which bring in debates about the nature of statistics, and also a debate about could some people have been cheating, and if so, who? The only way you can really guard against cheating is either by trusting people, which you won't trust me if you're a skeptic or anyone else, but you can trust yourself and your friends, hopefully, or by having experiments done under oppressively rigorous conditions where people are searched for hidden mobile phone devices, implanted telephonic tooth implants, and spy-type equipment. Skeptics will go to any length to say that people must have been cheating. And actually, there's only a limited number of precautions you can take against it in practical terms. So that's why by having these experiments wide open for anyone to do, at least you can organize your own group, do your own test. And this area of research can now be participatory. You don't have to take my word for it or anyone else's word. These are all published in peer-reviewed journals. You can read the texts online on my website. But you can do it yourself as well. The latest experiment, which has only just become technically possible, which is now being programmed in England and should be ready soon, is an automated straight telephone telepathy test where you register online. If you're picked to make the phone call, you get a text message or an email telling you to call your friend. You call a landline number, which is, say, a dedicated landline number. You get a message welcoming you to the test. You give your group number so it knows who you are, who the people are involved in the test. And then it rings the subject and says, there's one of your callers waiting on the phone to talk to you. Who is it? Press 1 for Jim, press 2 for Susan, press 3 for Bill. You make your guess, and as soon as you've made your guess, the line opens up and you get to talk to them. These experiments, I think, have the potential for being very popular participatory experiments. I've been talking to people in the mobile telephone industry, and some of them are interested in developing intuition tests programmed into the phone. These won't be experiments, but ways of training your intuition. Instead of a caller ID when the call comes in, there'll be a simple program, easy to do, which says who's calling. you know, and then quick key, you can have a quick key thing. You press 1 for Jane, 2 for Jill, 3 for Bill, etc. If you don't know who's calling, if you're in a hurry, you just answer it and you pass. But if you do make a guess, it'll keep a record, and you'll see how many you've got right. You can see if you're getting better with time, if you're training your intuition. And this way, we could find more talented subjects for our more rigorous experiments. I have a variety of online experiments proceeding right now. Another one is a phototelepathy test. And what that involves is two people do this test. One of you, when you register, you upload a photo of one of the people. There's a series of 20 10-second trials. And in each trial, the subject just sits there. It says, trial 1 begins, and the 10 seconds pass. The other person either sees your photo, or they see a photo of something completely different. At the end of 10 seconds, a box comes up. Was your partner looking at your photo? Yes, no. You click. And you can have feedback or not as you choose at the beginning of the test. The data are all stored online. It's a fun experiment to do. And I'd like any feedback you have about how best to spread these kinds of experiments. But several people have suggested this would work very well on Facebook or other social networking sites, because the problem I have is to get people to go to their computers at the same time as other people to do experiments. Most people are too busy. It's hard to arrange. In Facebook, they're all online. You've got people online anyway waiting to interact, and here's a way they can interact in a way that's fun to do. Can you tell if someone else is looking at your photo? The results so far suggest that people can. Positive, significant results. I also have a joint attention test designed to answer the question, when you're looking at the same thing as somebody else, do your minds come into a kind of resonance? Can you tell when someone else is looking at the same thing as you? In that test, there's 20 trials. Each trial has 2 pictures. By chance, you're looking at the same one or a different one in each trial. And after 10 seconds, each of you has to guess, was your partner looking at the same picture? That, again, is giving positive above-chance results. If joint attention works so that there's a kind of resonance you can actually feel when one other person's looking at it, what about real television? What about 50 million people watching Obama's acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention? Now, that's a bad example for doing an experiment because everyone knew it was happening. But with regular TV, if you went into a room, 2 rooms, adjacent 2 booths, each have TV running. One of them is showing live TV that's actually playing right now to millions of people. The other one is showing a TiVoed or recorded program that was broadcast hours or days ago that probably no one else but you is watching at this moment. Can people tell the difference? Interesting experiment. Huge relevance to modern media, which involve millions of people having their attention focused on the same thing at the same time. No one knows the answer because that experiment has not yet been done. But I mention it because some of these experiments are immensely relevant to modern media. Many of them are very cheap to do. Many of them very simple to do. Many of them work through interactive websites. And I think this is an area of research which can not only involve a lot of people, but can also involve a kind of public debate about the results. The results can be, the programming can be transparent. All my tests, anyone who wants to can see the coding, study the randomization system, and so forth. And in Britain, I've recently been doing a project with one of our leading skeptics, a very intelligent and reasonable skeptic. Some are dogmatic, ideologically motivated, and I think go way beyond any limits of science and reason in bigotry and prejudice. But we have one in Britain, the editor of the British Skeptic magazine, Professor Chris French, who's a friend of mine, and he's been running some of my tests himself while I've been here on the West Coast over the last month or 2. And when I get back, I'm going to find out just what he found. So far, looking online, the results he's got are coming out positive and in line with the kinds of tests I've been doing myself. But this is something where open-minded skeptics and proponents can cooperate on research, where the results can be easily obtainable, and where there can be research going on way beyond the narrow limits of academic laboratories with papers just in peer-reviewed journals that no one reads anyway, to participatory research which can engage large numbers of people. So that's more or less the state of the art. And a few other people are engaged in this kind of thing. There are a number of researchers in parapsychology and psychology doing this kind of research. One or two other people are doing online tests, notably Dean Radin, who spoke here at Google recently. But I'll just end by saying that the idea of the extended mind, the mind beyond the brain, a mind that stretches out through fields, gives us a way of extending the frontiers of science. We're not leaving behind science and reason and descending into a kind of black mud of superstition, as Freud called it. We're extending the realm of science to phenomena which are widely known about, which most people are really interested in, and which may well have a perfectly good scientific explanation, but which haven't been part of the rather narrower kind of science that we're used to. So I think that this is important because it makes science more relevant, not less. It expands science, and it makes science more interesting to more people. So I think this is a good thing. I think that some people think it's a bad thing, but anyway, that's my opinion. And I'd be interested to take any questions or comments that you may have.